What if everything you've been told about friendship was designed to keep you ordinary? What if the relationships you've cultivated are actually the invisible chains holding you back from extraordinary achievement? The most dangerous lies are the ones we tell ourselves about loyalty, about consistency, about maintaining connections that no longer serve our highest purpose. Look around this room. How many of you are carrying the dead weight of friendships that haven't contributed to your growth in years? How many opportunities have slipped through your fingers because you were too busy nurturing relationships that offer no return on your precious time investment? That's what we need to address today. Not with comfortable platitudes that make you feel good but keep you small. Not with the tired advice about friendship being its own reward. Instead, let's talk about the strategic reality of human connections that the truly successful understand but rarely discuss in polite company. You see, extraordinary success requires extraordinary measures. And those extraordinary measures often mean making decisions about relationships that the average person would find uncomfortable or even callous. But you're not here to be average, are you? I remember a young businessman, we'll call him David, who came to me troubled by his stalled progress. "I'm working harder than ever," he said, "but I just can't seem to break through to the next level." When I asked about his daily routines, his discipline seemed impeccable. His knowledge of his industry was vast. His dedication to his craft was obvious. But when I asked about the 5 people he spent the most time with, his expression changed. It was then that I recognized the source of his limitation. "They're good people," he defended. "Known most of them since college." I didn't ask if they were good people, I told him. I asked who they are, what they do, and what level of success they've achieved. As it turned out, David was the hardest working, most ambitious person in his circle by a significant margin. He was playing at a level that none of his friends could comprehend, let alone support. And every time he tried to push forward, there was subtle resistance. Small comments, jokes about his ambition, pressure to conform to their level of mediocrity. 6 months after David made the difficult decision to strategically limit his exposure to these old connections and deliberately build new relationships with people operating at his target level, his business had grown by 230%. The breakthrough he'd been seeking wasn't about tactics or strategies, it was about environment. Consider this truth: your income, your health, your success will tend to be the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. This isn't motivational speak, it's mathematical reality. So when was the last time you calculated that average? When was the last time you asked yourself what each relationship in your life is adding or subtracting from your trajectory? Most people will never do this analysis. It feels cold, calculating, perhaps even disloyal. And that's exactly why most people remain firmly lodged in mediocrity, while wondering why their dreams remain perpetually out of reach. I'm not suggesting you become a heartless relationship mercenary. I'm inviting you to become strategic about the most valuable resource you possess: your attention and your time. In the economy of relationships, there are 5 distinct categories that every connection in your life falls into. Understanding these categories is the first step toward creating the environmental conditions that make success not just possible but inevitable. The first category is what I call growth accelerators. These rare individuals consistently push you to higher levels of thinking, achievement, and accountability. After spending time with them, you feel simultaneously challenged and capable. They hold standards that make you uncomfortable in the best possible way. They see potential in you that you might not even recognize in yourself. Growth accelerators are often, but not always, operating at levels above your current position. But more important than their achievements is their mindset. They possess a hunger for growth that matches or exceeds your own. They are committed to continual reinvention and refuse to be defined by past accomplishments or failures. How many true growth accelerators do you currently have in your life? Most people, when they answer honestly, have one or perhaps none. And without these catalytic relationships, you are severely handicapping your potential. The second category is value exchangers. These relationships operate on the principle of mutual benefit. There is a relatively equal exchange of value, opportunity, connection, or support. These connections are healthy and necessary parts of your relationship portfolio. They might be colleagues, certain friends, or peers in your industry. Value exchangers don't necessarily drive your growth directly, but they contribute to your success through fair exchange. The key to maximizing these relationships is clarity and intention about what value you're providing and receiving. Without this awareness, value exchangers can drift into imbalanced relationships over time. The third category, and this is where most people's relationships cluster, is what I call neutrals. These connections neither significantly help nor hinder your progress. They are comfortable, familiar, and often maintained out of habit or history, rather than current value. There's nothing inherently wrong with having some neutral relationships in your life. They provide a sense of stability and normalcy that human beings need. The danger lies in having too many of them consuming your limited relationship bandwidth. Every neutral relationship taking up space in your calendar represents an opportunity cost, the potential growth accelerator you're not meeting, the valuable connection you're not making because your time is already allocated. The fourth category is energy drainers. These individuals consistently leave you feeling depleted after interactions. Their persistent negativity, complaints, drama, or neediness extract your most valuable resources, energy, focus, and positivity, without replenishing them in any way. You know who these people are in your life. They're the ones who call with a fresh crisis every week. The ones who dismiss your ambitions or subtly undermine your confidence. The ones who always seem to need something, but are mysteriously absent when you require support. Yet many of us maintain these relationships out of misplaced guilt, obligation, or the mistaken belief that enduring such connections somehow makes us good people. It doesn't. It makes us ineffective stewards of our potential. Finally, there's the fifth and most dangerous category, active saboteurs. These toxic connections go beyond merely draining your energy. They actively work against your progress, whether consciously or unconsciously. Active saboteurs are threatened by your growth because it highlights their stagnation. They'll disguise their sabotage as concern, humor, or even love. I just don't want you to be disappointed if this doesn't work out. You've changed. Who do you think you are? These relationships are like anchors tied to someone swimming for the surface. No amount of effort can overcome their downward pull. Identification and removal of active saboteurs from your inner circle isn't optional for anyone serious about significant achievement. It's mandatory. Now comes the uncomfortable part that separates the successful from the wishful thinkers. Once you've categorized every significant relationship in your life, and I mean every single one, you must make decisions based on this clear-eyed assessment. Growth accelerators should receive your highest investment of time, attention, and reciprocal value. These relationships deserve your priority scheduling, your most thoughtful follow-ups, your greatest appreciation. Value exchangers warrant consistent nurturing with clear boundaries around the exchange. Be intentional about maintaining balance and regularly reassessing the value proposition on both sides. Neutrals require a strategic reduction in time allocation. This doesn't mean eliminating these connections. It means being deliberate about limiting their claim on your limited relationship resources. Energy drainers need firm boundaries at minimum, and in many cases require a deliberate process of distancing. This might mean becoming suddenly busy when they reach out, reducing response time to communications, or directly communicating your need to focus on other priorities. Active saboteurs demand decisive action. There is no room for compromise here. Every day you maintain close connection with someone actively undermining your growth is a day you've chosen mediocrity over excellence. I can hear the objections forming already. But what about loyalty? What about being a good friend? Isn't this approach selfish? Let me address these directly. True loyalty isn't about maintaining the status quo. It's about supporting someone's highest good. Sometimes the most loyal thing you can do is to step back from a relationship that's keeping both of you small. Being a good friend doesn't mean being an indefinite resource for people who consistently take more than they give. It means having the courage to establish healthy parameters that honor your purpose and potential. As for selfishness, there's a profound difference between self-focused and self-centered. Being selective about your relationships isn't about thinking less of others. It's about being intentional about your limited capacity for meaningful connection. Moreover, your success will ultimately position you to be of greater service than your mediocrity ever could. The most generous people in history weren't those who sacrificed their greatness on the altar of comfortable relationships. They were those who became so exceptional that their impact transcended their immediate circle. This principle of selective association isn't new. Throughout history, those who achieved extraordinary outcomes understood the critical importance of their relational environment. Benjamin Franklin formed his famous Junto Club, A carefully selected group of forward-thinking individuals who met weekly to elevate each other's thinking and opportunities. Napoleon Hill, after studying the world's most successful people, identified the mastermind principle, the exponential power that comes from strategic alliance with the right people, as a common factor in exceptional achievement. The quality of your life will never exceed the quality of your relationships. That's not inspirational rhetoric. It's a functional description of how human potential operates. Your mind is constantly being programmed by your environment. Every conversation, every interaction, every person you give your attention to is shaping your thoughts, beliefs, expectations, and ultimately your actions. This isn't mystical thinking. It's basic psychological reality. When you spend hours each week with people whose thinking is limited, whose actions are inconsistent, whose standards are mediocre, you are systematically dismantling your own potential. Their limitations become your subconscious ceiling. Conversely, when you deliberately structure your relationship environment to include people operating at levels beyond your current position, you create a constant subtle pressure toward elevation. Their standards become your new normal. Their thinking patterns rewire your own mental pathways. Their achievements reset your sense of what's possible. This isn't about becoming an elitist. It's about becoming intentional. The most valuable real estate on earth isn't found in Manhattan or Monaco. It's the space in your calendar and the contacts in your phone. Who gets access to that precious territory is perhaps the most significant determinant of where you'll be 5 years from now. I want to be extremely practical about how to implement this relationship reset, because understanding these principles without application is merely intellectual entertainment. The first step is conducting a complete relationship inventory. List every person with whom you regularly interact. Don't only include those you consider friends, include colleagues, family members, neighbors, service providers, anyone who consistently occupies your attention. Next to each name, note approximately how many hours per month you interact with this person. Be honest here. Include phone calls, messages, social gatherings, everything. The numbers will likely surprise you. Now comes the critical evaluation. For each person, ask yourself these 5 questions. First, does this person's presence in my life make me more or less likely to achieve my highest priorities? Second, after spending time with this person, do I feel energized or depleted? Third, does this person consistently encourage my growth or subtly undermine it? Fourth, if I were to achieve my biggest goals, would this relationship likely strengthen or weaken? And fifth, does this person's life reflect the values and standards to which I aspire? Based on your answers, categorize each relationship according to the 5 types we discussed. This exercise alone will create profound clarity about why certain areas of your life may be stagnant despite your best efforts. The next step requires courage. You must begin systematically reallocating your relationship resources based on this assessment. For the growth accelerators, create deliberate opportunities for deeper connection. This might mean scheduling regular meals, setting up a formal mentoring arrangement, or finding ways to work together on projects. Be proactive. These high-value relationships won't develop by chance in the margins of your calendar. For value exchangers, bring conscious attention to maintaining mutuality. Regularly assess what you're giving and receiving, and adjust accordingly to ensure these relationships remain balanced and beneficial. For neutrals, implement what I call the exposure diet. Gradually reduce the frequency and duration of interactions. This doesn't require dramatic announcements or confrontations. Simply become more selective about which invitations you accept, which calls you return promptly, which gatherings take priority. For energy drainers, establish clear boundaries immediately. This might involve direct communication. I value our friendship, but I'm in a season where I need to focus intensely on specific priorities. I'll have to be less available for a while. Or it might simply involve becoming systematically less accessible without explanation. For active saboteurs, the approach must be decisive, and in most cases immediate. There's rarely value in explaining your decision to distance yourself. Those explanations typically invite manipulation, guilt tactics, or promises of change that rarely materialize. Instead, make the clean break that your future deserves. This process isn't easy. Restructuring your relationship environment involves short-term discomfort for long-term transformation. You'll face resistance, guilt, accusations, and self-doubt. You'll question whether you're making the right choices. That discomfort is the price of admission to your next level of achievement. Remember David, the businessman I mentioned earlier. The hardest part of his journey wasn't implementing new business strategies. It was weathering the emotional storm that came with restricting access to friends who had been part of his life for over a decade. There were uncomfortable conversations. There were accusations of him changing or forgetting where he came from. There were attempts to pull him back to old patterns of interaction. And there were moments when the loneliness of transition made him question his choices. But on the other side of that temporary discomfort was a level of success, fulfillment, and impact that would have remained perpetually out of reach had he prioritized relational comfort over growth. Today, he's not only achieved his own goals, but has become a growth accelerator for others in his industry. I call this process the 90-day relationship reset, because that's typically how long it takes to restructure your environment and work through the emotional adjustments that follow. Those 3 months may be challenging, but they set the stage for everything that follows. Another objection I often hear is, but how do I find these growth accelerator relationships? I don't have access to those kinds of people. This mindset itself reveals part of the problem. Growth accelerators aren't a mysterious elite class, accessible only through special permission. They're individuals committed to advancement who exist in every industry, community, and economic bracket. Finding them requires 3 things: clarity, visibility, and value. Clarity means knowing precisely what kind of relationships would best support your specific goals. Define the characteristics, mindsets, experiences, and capabilities that would complement your journey. Be specific. Vague intentions produce vague results. Visibility involves positioning yourself where these potential connections can see you. This means attending certain events, joining particular organizations, volunteering for specific causes, or becoming active in forums where growth-minded individuals congregate. Value refers to what you bring to these potential relationships. Growth accelerators aren't looking for followers or fans. They're attracted to others who can contribute meaningfully to mutual advancement. Develop your knowledge, skills, connections, or insights to a level that makes you a valuable addition to their world. The combination of these 3 elements, clarity, visibility, and value, creates a magnetic effect that naturally attracts the right relationships into your orbit. Consider this fundamental truth. Your life moves in the direction of your strongest relationships. Not your intention, not your hopes, not even your actions in isolation. The people you consistently connect with are shaping your destiny more powerfully than perhaps any other single factor. If you're serious about creating extraordinary results in any area of life, you must become equally serious about the company you keep. There is simply no way around this principle. I've seen countless individuals transform their health, wealth, and happiness, not by adopting new strategies, but by adopting new relationships. I've watched struggling entrepreneurs completely revolutionize their businesses within months of changing their peer group. I've observed people break decades-long patterns of self-sabotage simply by removing themselves from environments that reinforce those patterns. The evidence is overwhelming, and the principle is clear. Your relationships are either lifting you toward your potential or dragging you toward mediocrity. There is no neutral ground. So I challenge you today, have the courage to assess your relationship reality honestly. Have the wisdom to make difficult decisions based on that assessment. And have the persistence to maintain those standards even when it's uncomfortable. Because the truth is, the relationships that feel the most difficult to evaluate or adjust are precisely the ones that require your immediate attention. That resistance is often a signal that these connections have an outsized influence on your trajectory, for better or worse. Your potential is too valuable to be sacrificed on the altar of comfortable mediocrity. The contributions you're capable of making are too important to be diminished by relationships that constrain rather than expand your capacity. The good news is that once you implement this relationship reset, the results begin to materialize with surprising speed. New opportunities emerge. Creative solutions to old problems become apparent. Resources you didn't know existed suddenly become available. The heavy gravitational pull of limited thinking starts to release its hold on your aspirations. This happens because you've changed not just your associations, but the entire ecosystem in which your potential operates. You've removed the invisible constraints that were limiting your vision and replaced them with connections that continually expand your sense of what's possible. And here's something few people talk about. As you elevate your relationship standards, you simultaneously elevate what you bring to every relationship. You become more valuable, not just to yourself, but to everyone you connect with. Your increased capacity, resources, and perspective allow you to contribute at levels that weren't previously available to you. This creates a virtuous cycle where better relationships make you better, which attracts even better relationships, which make you even better still. This compounding effect is how ordinary individuals transform into extraordinary performers in relatively short periods. So as we transition to discussing how to strategically build these high-value connections, remember this: the decision to reset your relationship environment isn't selfish. It's necessary. Not just for your benefit, but for everyone who will ultimately be served by your fully realized potential. The temporary discomfort of elevated standards is a small price to pay for the permanent transformation of your results. And those who truly belong in your future will find a way to grow alongside you, while those who don't will naturally fall away. Your relationship choices today are creating your reality tomorrow. Choose with the wisdom that recognizes this truth, and watch as possibilities you couldn't previously imagine begin to unfold before you. Now that you understand how to assess and restructure your current relationship environment, the question becomes: how do you strategically build the connections that will accelerate your success? Because make no mistake, simply eliminating negative relationships creates space, but space alone doesn't propel you forward. That empty space must be intentionally filled with the right relationships, or nature will fill it for you, typically with more of what you've always had. Most people approach relationship building backward. They focus on what they can get rather than what they can give. They seek connections based on immediate need rather than long-term vision. They treat relationship development as an event rather than a process. And then they wonder why their network remains stagnant or transactional. The truth is that high-value relationships operate according to principles that are both timeless and predictable. When you understand and apply these principles, building powerful connections becomes less about luck or charisma and more about strategy and execution. Let's start with the foundation, the reciprocity principle. At its core, this principle states that significant relationships naturally seek equilibrium in the exchange of value. Note that I said value, not effort or time. This distinction is critical. Many people believe they're upholding their end of a relationship by simply being available or providing emotional support. While these contributions matter, they rarely differentiate you in the eyes of high-achieving individuals who are surrounded by people offering the same limited value proposition. True reciprocity means bringing something specific and meaningful to the table, something that advances the other person's priorities in ways they find valuable. This might be knowledge, connections, opportunities, insights, or resources that are uniquely available through you. I'm reminded of Sarah, a young woman who built a 7-figure business, starting with absolutely no industry connections or advantages. When I asked how she developed such a powerful network despite her initial obscurity, her answer was revealing. I became obsessive about understanding exactly what successful people in my industry needed but couldn't easily find, she told me. Then I positioned myself as the reliable source of that specific value. For Sarah, this meant becoming an expert curator of emerging research that busy executives in her field needed, but didn't have time to track themselves. Every week she synthesized the most important findings into concise briefings and shared them with carefully selected individuals. No asks, no expectations, just consistent, specific value delivered with no strings attached. Within 6 months, those same executives were proactively reaching out to her, inviting her to exclusive events, introducing her to their contacts, and eventually becoming her clients and partners. The reciprocity principle activated naturally because she created a value imbalance that sought equilibrium. Notice what Sarah didn't do. She didn't ask for favors first. She didn't attend networking events, hoping to hand out business cards. She didn't send cold messages asking for mentorship or opportunities. She identified specific value she could provide and delivered it consistently until reciprocity became almost inevitable. This approach requires patience, but it collapses timeframes dramatically compared to traditional networking methods. Most people spend years cultivating connections that someone using strategic value-first positioning can develop in months. But this raises a critical question. How do you identify which specific connections will most accelerate your progress? This brings us to the principle of strategic relationship targeting. Most people's approach to relationship building is scattered and opportunistic. They connect with whoever happens to be accessible or visible, regardless of strategic alignment. This is like trying to build a house by gathering whatever materials you happen to stumble across rather than following a blueprint. Strategic relationship targeting begins with clarity about your most important objectives. Once those objectives are crystal clear, you can work backward to identify the specific types of relationships that would most directly facilitate those outcomes. This isn't about creating a wish list of famous or wealthy people you'd like to know. It's about identifying the characteristics, knowledge, resources, connections, or influences that would specifically accelerate your progress toward defined goals. For instance, if your objective is to publish a book, your strategic targets might include successful authors in your genre, editors at publishing houses, literary agents with relevant track records, and book marketing specialists. If your goal is to scale a business in a particular industry, your targets would include potential strategic partners, investors with sector expertise, successful entrepreneurs who've navigated similar growth phases, and potential clients at your target level. Once you've identified these categories, the next step is research. Not to find ways to approach these individuals directly, but to understand what they value, what challenges they face, what opportunities they seek, and what gaps exist in their current relationship networks. This research phase is where most people get impatient and take shortcuts. They want to rush straight to the outreach, but thorough research is what separates sophisticated relationship builders from desperate networkers. It allows you to position yourself as precisely valuable rather than generically interested. With clarity about both your targets and their priorities, you can implement what I call the three-tier approach to relationship building. This method recognizes that direct access to your ultimate relationship targets may not be immediately available, but strategic connections can be built systematically through intermediate relationships. Tier 1 consists of relationships that are currently accessible to you, people with whom you can establish direct connection without special introduction or access. These might be colleagues, members of organizations you belong to, participants in events you attend, or individuals in your extended network. The key is selecting Tier 1 connections not based solely on their direct value to you, but on their potential to serve as bridges to Tier 2 relationships, those 1 degree removed from your current access, but 1 step closer to your ultimate targets. For example, Sarah didn't begin by targeting the CEOs of major companies in her industry. She started with mid-level executives and subject matter experts who were accessible to her, built strong relationships with them through her value-first approach, and then leveraged those connections to access higher-level relationships over time. This patient, systematic approach creates what appears to others as lucky breaks or being in the right place at the right time. But these coincidences are actually the predictable result of strategic positioning. With this framework in place, you need a specific methodology for initiating and developing these relationships. This brings us to the art of value-first positioning, the most critical skill in sophisticated relationship building. Most people's approach to new relationships is fundamentally extractive. Even when they try to be helpful or generous, there's an underlying expectation of immediate or near-term return. This creates a subtle but palpable sense of obligation that sophisticated individuals detect immediately. Value-first positioning flips this dynamic entirely. It begins with a simple but powerful question: how can I contribute significant value to this person's priorities before asking for anything in return? This question forces you to think deeply about what constitutes actual value from the other person's perspective, not what you assume would be valuable or what would be easy for you to provide. For some relationships, the most valuable contribution might be connecting them with a specific opportunity or resource they need. For others, it might be providing unique information or insight related to their current projects. For still others, it might be offering specialized skills or support that aligns with their immediate priorities. The key is specificity and relevance. Generic offers of help, "Theusa, let me know if there's anything I can do," create no compelling value proposition. Specific, relevant offers that demonstrate both thoughtfulness and capability create immediate differentiation. Consider how most people attempt to build relationships with those they admire or wish to learn from. They send messages saying, "I'd love to pick your brain," or "Could I take you to coffee to get your advice?" These approaches position the relationship as immediately extractive. You want something valuable, their time, knowledge, guidance, without offering clear value in return. Contrast this with value-first positioning. I noticed you recently mentioned the challenge of specific issue. I've compiled research on 3 approaches that have worked for similar situations, including case studies and key findings. Would it be helpful if I shared this with you? This approach demonstrates that you've paid attention to their priorities, done work that might benefit them, and are offering value without expectation of immediate return. It positions you as a resource rather than another obligation. The compound interest of this approach is extraordinary. Each value-first interaction creates positive association and predisposes the relationship toward reciprocity without you having to ask. Over time, these deposits accumulate into relationship capital that can be drawn upon when needed. But creating these initial value propositions requires something most people are unwilling to invest: advanced preparation. Before reaching out to any strategic relationship target, you should spend significant time understanding their current priorities, challenges, projects, and interests. This research allows you to craft value propositions that resonate specifically with their needs rather than generic offers. With your value-first positioning established, the next critical element is accelerated trust building. The ability to develop meaningful relationship depth in compressed time frames. Trust typically develops through consistent interaction over extended periods. But in the context of strategic relationship building, you often need to establish sufficient trust to enable meaningful exchange without the luxury of years of incremental development. The science of rapid trust development reveals several key accelerators that can compress this timeline significantly. First is the principle of demonstrated competence. People trust those who clearly know what they're talking about in areas relevant to their priorities. By showcasing specific expertise rather than general capability, you create a foundation for trust in your judgment and insights. Second is the principle of similarity recognition. Humans naturally trust those with whom they share important values, experiences, or perspectives. By authentically highlighting relevant points of connection, you activate the unconscious trust mechanisms that recognize this person is like me in ways that matter. Third is the principle of appropriate vulnerability. Contrary to common assumption, strategic vulnerability, sharing challenges or limitations in specific contexts, actually accelerates trust by demonstrating authenticity and self-awareness. The key is selectivity. Vulnerability should be relevant and proportional to the relationship stage. Fourth is the principle of reliability demonstration. Small commitments fulfilled with precision create disproportionate trust compared to their apparent significance. When you say you'll send something by Tuesday at 10 a.m. and it arrives precisely at that time, you signal a level of reliability that distinguishes you immediately. Fifth is the principle of character consistency. How you treat others, especially those who cannot obviously benefit you, creates a powerful trust signal. Strategic relationship builders understand that their behavior toward everyone in their environment is constantly observed and evaluated by the people they most want to impress. Combining these principles creates what appears to others as natural chemistry or instant connection, but is actually the predictable result of deliberate trust acceleration techniques. Consider how Jessica, a consultant I worked with, used these principles to develop a relationship with the CEO of a company she hoped to work with, someone who was notoriously difficult to access and known for maintaining a very selective inner circle. Rather than attempting direct outreach, Jessica first identified a specific challenge the company was facing based on their public statements. She then created a comprehensive analysis of 3 potential approaches to that challenge, including detailed pros and cons of each based on her specialized expertise. She reached out to the CEO's chief of staff with this specific value proposition. I've developed an analysis of 3 potential approaches to the supply chain challenge Mr. Johnson mentioned in his recent interview. There's no obligation or pitch. I simply thought this might be useful given my background in this specific area. Would it be helpful if I shared this with him? The analysis was delivered as promised, thorough, insightful, and without any ask attached. 3 weeks later, she received an invitation to present her findings directly to the executive team, with the CEO in attendance. During that meeting, she demonstrated both competence in her field and authentic vulnerability by openly acknowledging the limitations of certain approaches. She found natural moments to establish points of similarity with the CEO's stated philosophy, and delivered precisely on every small commitment made during the interaction. Within 2 months, she had secured a consulting contract worth over $500,000, not by pitching or selling, but by systematically building trust through deliberate application of these principles. Notice that at no point did Jessica resort to manipulation or insincerity. Every element of her approach was authentic and value-centered. The strategic aspect wasn't in manufacturing something false, but in thoughtfully sequencing and emphasizing genuine points of connection and contribution. With these foundational elements in place, you can implement specific relationship elevation tactics that transform initial connections into powerful alliances. The first tactic is what I call strategic depth development. Most relationships remain perpetually shallow because interactions focus exclusively on surface-level topics or immediate transactions. Strategic depth involves deliberately steering conversations toward areas of significant meaning, core values, formative experiences, future aspirations, or philosophical perspectives. These deeper territories create relationship differentiation because so few connections ever venture beyond the superficial. When someone shares their fundamental values or meaningful personal history with you, the relationship immediately distinguishes itself from their hundreds of transactional connections. The key is introducing these elements naturally rather than forcing awkward personal disclosures. One effective approach is what I call meaningful self-disclosure, sharing something genuinely significant about your own perspective or experience that creates space for reciprocal depth. The second tactic is borrowed credibility positioning. This involves strategically leveraging existing relationships to establish initial credibility with new connections. When someone respected introduces you to another person in their network, that introduction carries an implicit endorsement. It essentially says, "I've vetted this person and found them worthy of my trust," which should mean something to you given your trust in me. This borrowed credibility provides an immediate head start compared to cold outreach. It bypasses the initial skepticism that naturally accompanies new connections and positions you within a context of existing trust. The key to maximizing this tactic is being extremely selective about which introductions you request, and ensuring that when you receive such introductions, you consistently exceed expectations. Each successful leveraging of borrowed credibility strengthens your relationship with both the new connection and the person who provided the introduction. The third tactic is what I call triangulated introductions. Instead of directly asking your connections to introduce you to their valuable contacts, which can feel presumptuous, you create natural opportunities for three-way interaction. For example, rather than asking, "Could you introduce me to Susan?" you might say, "I was thinking about the challenge you mentioned Susan is facing with her new project. I recently worked on something similar and developed an approach that might be useful to her. Would it make sense for me to share that with both of you if you think it might be helpful?" This approach frames the introduction around specific value rather than general networking, making it both more likely to be offered and more productive when it occurs. The fourth tactic is the three-contact rule for relationship momentum. Research on relationship development shows that there's a critical threshold that occurs after approximately 3 meaningful interactions. Before this threshold, connections remain tentative and easily forgotten. After 3 substantive exchanges, relationships begin to develop their own momentum and become significantly more likely to continue. Strategic relationship builders ensure they create at least 3 meaningful points of contact with important new connections within a relatively compressed time frame, typically 30-45 days. These interactions should each provide distinct value and showcase different facets of what you bring to the relationship. For instance, your first interaction might demonstrate your expertise in a particular area. Your second might highlight your valuable connections by facilitating an introduction. Your third might showcase your thoughtfulness through a highly personalized resource or opportunity relevant to their current priorities. By deliberately orchestrating these varied interactions, you create a multidimensional relationship impression that far exceeds the impact of sporadic or single-dimensional contact. The fifth tactic involves strategic event leverage. Certain environments naturally accelerate relationship development by removing everyday barriers and creating shared experiences. Industry conferences, exclusive workshops, invitation-only gatherings, or even carefully organized small group dinners can compress months of relationship building into days or hours. The key is selective participation combined with thorough preparation. Before attending any event where strategic relationship targets will be present, develop specific value propositions for each key individual, research their current priorities, and create natural opportunities for meaningful interaction. This might involve organizing a small dinner adjacent to the main event, preparing a specific and valuable insight to share during a roundtable discussion, or simply doing enough research to ask the one question no one else will think to ask. Where most attendees approach such events casually, hoping for lucky connections, strategic relationship builders see them as carefully orchestrated opportunities for accelerated trust building and value demonstration. By combining these tactical approaches with the foundational principles we've discussed, you create a systematic methodology for developing exactly the relationships your success requires. This isn't about manipulating or using people, it's about being intentional about creating genuine value exchanges that benefit all involved. Remember that truly valuable relationships are never one-sided. The goal isn't to extract value from others, but to create connections where both parties consistently benefit in ways they find meaningful. This mutuality is what transforms temporary interactions into enduring alliances. Too often, people approach relationship building with neediness, seeking validation, opportunities, or resources from those they perceive as more successful or connected. This energy is immediately detectable and universally repellent to high-value individuals. Strategic relationship building comes from a position of strength. Knowing the specific value you offer, respecting both your own time and others, and focusing on creating exchanges that genuinely benefit both parties. This strength-based positioning transforms how others perceive your relationship overtures. Rather than seeing yet another person seeking something from them, they recognize someone who might be valuable to know. Someone who approached the relationship with something to offer rather than merely something to gain. The cumulative effect of these principles and tactics is the development of what I call your relationship portfolio. A strategically balanced collection of connections that provide various forms of value, opportunity, support, and growth. Just as a financial portfolio requires diversification and regular rebalancing, your relationship portfolio needs thoughtful curation. Some connections will provide industry expertise, others will offer accountability, still others will create opportunities or facilitate key introductions. The quality of this portfolio, not merely the quantity of connections, will determine the trajectory of your success across every domain of life. No other single factor has more influence on your outcomes than the collective impact of your closest relationships. As you implement these approaches, maintain awareness of the relationship current, the continuous flow of value between you and your key connections. This current must remain generally balanced over time, though the specific timing and nature of exchanges will vary. In some relationships, you might provide disproportionate value for extended periods before receiving reciprocal benefits. In others, the exchanges might be more immediately balanced. The key is maintaining awareness of the overall pattern to ensure that important relationships don't become chronically one-sided in either direction. Now it's important to address potential ethical concerns about this strategic approach to relationships. Some might wonder, isn't this calculating? Doesn't authentic connection happen naturally rather than strategically? This perspective confuses strategy with insincerity. The most valuable relationships are indeed authentic, but authenticity and intentionality are not mutually exclusive. In fact, being deliberate about seeking and developing relationships with people who share your values and vision increases the likelihood of genuine connection. Think about it this way. The most important relationship in many people's lives, finding a life partner, often involves extremely intentional strategies. People carefully consider what they want in a partner, position themselves in environments where compatible individuals might be found, and make deliberate choices about how they present themselves and develop initial connections. No one considers this calculating or inauthentic. It's recognized as appropriate intentionality around something too important to leave entirely to chance. The same principle applies to all relationships that significantly impact your life trajectory. The strategic elements I've described are not about manipulating others or creating false impressions. They're about increasing the probability of finding and developing genuine connections with the right people by being thoughtful about the process. True strategic relationship building enhances authenticity by ensuring you connect with people who truly align with your values and vision rather than merely whoever happens to be conveniently accessible in your current environment. As we prepare to discuss how to manage the relationship endgame, including when and how to transition away from connections that no longer serve mutual growth, remember this fundamental truth: the quality of your life will never exceed the quality of your relationships. Every truly exceptional achievement in human history has been the product of not just individual talent or effort, but of strategic relationship synergy. The right people, connected in the right ways, at the right time, focused on the right objectives. By becoming intentional about this critical success factor rather than leaving it to chance, you position yourself for possibilities that remain perpetually out of reach for those who simply hope good relationships will somehow find them. Your relationship choices are creating your future reality one connection at a time. Choose with the clarity, intention, and strategic vision that the importance of this decision deserves. Even with the most strategic approach to building valuable connections, there comes a critical moment that separates truly successful individuals from those who plateau: the courage to recognize when a relationship has fulfilled its purpose. This might be the most uncomfortable truth we'll discuss today. Some relationships, even valuable ones, have natural expiration dates. Recognizing and acting on this reality isn't callous, it's the necessary final piece of relationship mastery that few have the wisdom to implement. Every relationship in your life exists on a continuum of value exchange. At certain points, that exchange reaches its natural conclusion, either because you've both extracted the primary value available to each other, or because one or both parties have evolved in directions that no longer create mutual benefit. The question then becomes, how do you identify relationships that have reached their point of diminishing returns, and what do you do about it? Most people avoid this question entirely. They allow outdated relationships to consume precious bandwidth that should be allocated to connections more aligned with their current trajectory. They maintain relationships out of habit, guilt, or fear rather than ongoing value. And they wonder why their growth eventually stagnates despite their best efforts in other areas. The most sophisticated relationship builders understand that ending or fundamentally restructuring certain connections isn't a failure. It's a necessary component of continued evolution. Just as a snake must shed its skin to grow, you must periodically shed relationships that no longer fit your expanding capacity and direction. Consider Michael, a mid-career professional who had built an impressive network in his industry. For years, he'd maintained monthly mastermind meetings with 4 colleagues who had once been instrumental to his growth. But as he analyzed his relationship portfolio using the principles we've discussed, he realized something uncomfortable. These meetings no longer generated insights or opportunities relevant to his current objectives. The group had become comfortable rather than challenging, familiar rather than growth-producing. They discussed the same topics, recycled the same perspectives, and remained focused on issues Michael had transcended years ago. Yet out of loyalty and habit, he continued investing significant time and energy in maintaining these connections. When Michael finally made the difficult decision to step away from this group and reallocate that time to cultivating relationships with people operating at his target level, the results were immediate and dramatic. Within 6 months, he had secured opportunities that had seemed unattainable for years prior, not because he suddenly became more capable, but because he finally surrounded himself with people who could open doors relevant to his current aspirations. Michael's story illustrates a fundamental reality. What got you here won't get you there. The relationships that facilitated your growth to this point may be precisely what prevent your growth to the next level. This brings us to the critical skill of recognizing diminishing returns in relationships. There are 5 primary indicators that a once valuable connection may have reached its natural conclusion. First is stagnation in the exchange of ideas, opportunities, or growth. When interactions become predictable and stop generating new insights or possibilities, the relationship may have fulfilled its primary developmental purpose. Second is an increasing sense of obligation rather than anticipation when interacting. When connections that once energized you now feel like obligations to fulfill, it's a clear signal that the value exchange has shifted. Third is significant divergence in values, standards, or directions. As you evolve, some relationships naturally become less aligned with your core principles or objectives. This misalignment creates subtle but persistent friction that consumes energy better directed elsewhere. Fourth is consistently one-sided value exchange. Despite your best efforts to maintain reciprocity, some relationships naturally evolve toward imbalance. When this pattern persists despite direct communication and adjustment attempts, it signals a structural issue in the relationship. Fifth is the opportunity cost becoming too high. As your capacity and value increase, the relative value of certain relationships may diminish simply because your time has become more precious and better allocated to higher return connections. The key is regular, intentional assessment of whether your current relationship portfolio matches your current needs and objectives, with deliberate rebalancing when misalignments become apparent. This ongoing optimization process is supported by 5 daily disciplines that form the foundation of relationship mastery. First is consistent value creation. The daily habit of generating ideas, insights, connections, or opportunities that could benefit the key people in your relationship portfolio. This proactive value orientation ensures you're always operating from abundance rather than neediness. Second is strategic selection. The discipline of carefully choosing which invitations to accept, which events to attend, and which new connections to pursue based on alignment with your core objectives, rather than convenience or flattery. Third is active relationship intelligence. The practice of systematically gathering and organizing relevant information about your key connections, including their current projects, recent achievements, emerging challenges, and evolving interests. Fourth is scheduled investment, the deliberate allocation of specific time blocks for relationship development, rather than leaving this critical success factor to chance or treating it as an afterthought. Fifth is regular relationship auditing, the periodic, comprehensive review of your entire relationship portfolio to identify connections that need strengthening, restructuring, or strategic distancing. These 5 disciplines, practiced consistently, transform relationship development from a mysterious, luck-based process to a predictable strategic system for accelerating your success. As we conclude, I challenge you to take immediate action on what you've learned today. Conduct your first complete relationship audit within the next 48 hours. Identify the connections that deserve greater investment, those that require restructuring, and those that have reached their natural conclusion. Then make one decisive move in each category. Reach out to strengthen a high-potential relationship, recalibrate a misaligned connection, and create appropriate distance in a relationship that's reached diminishing returns. This single exercise, if approached with honesty and executed with integrity, will create immediate space for new growth and opportunities that may have been blocked by outdated relationship patterns. Remember that in the realm of relationships, as in every other area of life, your results are created by your decisions, not your conditions. The quality of your connections isn't determined by luck or circumstance, but by the clarity of your standards and the courage of your choices. When you take full responsibility for strategically building the relationship environment your success requires, possibilities emerge that remain forever invisible to those who leave this critical factor to chance. Choose wisely, act decisively, and watch as your relationship mastery becomes not just a personal advantage, but a legacy that elevates everyone fortunate enough to be part of your carefully curated circle.